give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boys are back. The Wolves of Ball Street. Your favorite draft analyst. It is the Draftdaq NBA Draft Show on the No Ceilings podcast feed. My name is Corey Teleba, and as always, my co-host Albert Garbage Time Gim is back in the saddle to kick off another episode. Albert, how we doing?
I am doing much better. First off, want to give a shout out to you, Corey, and to Tyler Rucker for filling in last week. I have been a little bit under the weather the last couple of weeks or so really appreciate the fill in, but I'm feeling great now. I'm feeling great today, and I'm super excited about the prospect we're talking about today. So it's especially good. Yes,
we are breaking down UConn's Jordan Hawkins, shooting guard, 20-year-old sophomore. He will be 21 years old on draft night. He is listed at 6'5", 195 pounds. He is playing 28 minutes per game, averaging 15.4 points per game, 3.6 rebounds, 1.5 assists, 1.4 turnovers, 1 steal, a half a block, shooting 40% from the field, 39.2% from three, 84.4% for the free throw line, a true shooting percentage of 57.1% with a PER of 20.1. Let's get into some stock prices, preseason and current. Preseason. ESPN had Hawkins at 36. SB Nation did not have him ranked. Basketball News had him at 39. The Athletic had him at 26. Tankathon didn't have him ranked. No Ceilings had him at, I have 18 listed, but that seems wrong. I want to say maybe I wrote it wrong and it was like probably 38. Sports Illustrated had him at 30, an average stock price of 37.4. He came in at 36 on the Draftdaq IPO. Currently, ESPN has him at 40. The Athletic has him at 28. Tankathon has him at 34. Basketball News has him at 26. Bleacher Report has him at 32. Sports Illustrated at 37. No Ceilings at 38. Average price of 33.6. He is currently ranked 29 on the latest Draftdaq update. So, Albert, I ask you, is Jordan Hawkins stock priced too high, too low, or is it just right at 33.6 and number 29 on the composite draft rankings?
I think for me, it's slightly low, but I'm not going to freak out. Now, on my personal board, I do have him pretty significantly higher. Actually, on the latest board that I did, I had him at 17, right? Mm-hmm. But for me, the reason why I'm saying that it's not ridiculous is because I can totally understand. I think Jordan Hawkins is the type of player and prospect that can be a little divisive in terms of how people value guards of his style and niche. You know, I think for me personally, I like this style of player, which is why he's a little bit higher, but I can totally understand if there are people out there who have him in the 40s and 50s because he's just not their cup of tea. So that range of like 33, 29, whatever, seems pretty fair to me, considering that he's just the type of guy that I like.
Yeah, you have liked him in particular for a while. I mean, you had him on your last board. Do you remember like what range he was in last year for you?
Last year, I definitely had a second round grade on him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you're right. He's divisive even within like the No Ceilings group chat. There are some guys on the squad who really like him. There are some guys who are a little bit lower on him. I know I had a talk with Nathan about him. We were talking about like a conversation with some, people who work in the NBA who are even a little bit up and down on him, don't quite know what to do with him. So I think he's an interesting guy to talk about, even though he's seemingly like on the border of the first and second round. Like he's still on that cusp, but UConn is a very good team this year. They're going to play in a lot of big national television spots. And he's a guy, I think if he gets hot in the tournament, I think you're talking about a guy who could, play himself into that top 20 range. I think I agree with you. I totally understand why his draft stock is where it is, but I think I side with you in that I also think that the skills that he is really great at, he's really great at them. And in this range, if you can get somebody who is really great at something as valuable as shooting, there's an argument to be made that when we look back, if he goes in this range, he's going to be a guy that you could say maybe he's one of the best 15 players from the class. So in that regard, you can make arguments for him. I think once you get past 15, I think this draft, there's definitely guys who I'd prefer over him after the lottery. But once you get past that spot, there are definitely guys that you're like, I can't definitively say this guy is going to work out over this next guy. So I think it's fair, but I'm with you. I'm a little bit higher on him than the ranking personally. Now, go ahead.
No. I just really quickly. I just feel like he's in that range where Corey, it goes to all the questions that you're asking, right? Like he's the type of guy where his outcome could be one of a million different outcomes, and so this is why you take a guy like this in that range, in terms of like late first, early second, just because he's kind of a wild card, and that's but as you mentioned, Corey. He's a wild card, but he's a wild card that is also pretty rock solid in the things that he's good at. So like we know what he's going to walk into. So he's not walking into the league as a complete mystery is what Jordan Hawkins is. He's going to walk into the league with 2 or 3 skills that he's really good at. And now where he ends up is all going to depend on how do you develop out the rest and flesh out the rest of your game. So I'm with you, man. It totally makes sense.
Now, in sticking with like him being on the periphery of that range, we're going to go into our if you had $10 segment, right? And normally I try to pair guys who are kind of like the same kind of player, and almost like what kind of which of these kinds of players would you prefer? I pivoted a little bit from that today in that I looked at the draft rankings that were released a couple of weeks ago at NoCeilingsNBA.com, and I went through a little cluster towards the end of the first round. So if you had $10 to invest in Jordan Hawkins, Colby Jones, and Julian Phillips, how would you spend your $10? These guys, not all that similar to each other, but ranked 28, 29, 31 on the draft rankings. So $10, yours to spend. How are you doing it?
First off, I want to say our listeners may think I'm a liar, but I had a really strong feeling you were going to mention Colby Jones here, just because I think the type of prospects that they are very different. So I can see like this is a really great way to find out like what do we value in terms of like skills and prospects and stuff like that. So, and then the Phillips one is a great one just because I freaking love Julian Phillips. Let's do this. I want to stay true to my board. I think that makes sense to me. Colby Jones is actually a guy who like skyrocketed up my board, and I ended up on the latest board I have him at 26. So he's a guy that honestly wasn't really on my radar much, but I watched his stuff and I was like, oh, this guy's awesome. So, okay, we'll do. Okay. Because I have these guys not too far from each other. So we'll do this. I'm going to do Jordan Hawkins. I'm going to give him $4. And then I'm going to give $3 to the other 2 guys. Feels fair to me.
That's what I'm doing as well.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing as well. Because, I mean, we haven't talked about Colby Jones much on this show, but, Rucker did an excellent piece on how versatile he is.
Yeah.
And, a guy at that size who, not the perfect shooter, not, but has decent form, can hit it at a good clip, just not shooting it at the same volume as a guy like Hawkins, but just such a good playmaker, just the value that he could bring to an NBA team. And I don't think he's anywhere in the realm of Jalen Williams on the Thunder personally, but you see how a guy like Jalen, who is just so versatile, can play multiple spots, can handle your offense a little bit, has that maturity to step in and contribute right away. I think depending on the team, you could see Colby, earn a role similar to him, right? And play style and minutes. Maybe not, going to be as effective in that, but I could see him contributing to a team early. Like Julian Phillips, I think you can make the argument that, maybe if you're a team that believes in his shot, you invest more into him because he has physical tools maybe that the other guys don't necessarily have. And if you believe that a guy who shoots free throws like that can, have that translate to the 3-point line, now you're looking at like a real 3-and-D guy at a valuable position in the NBA. And then Jordan Hawkins, if you're like, hey, this guy could be one of the most dangerous high volume movement shooters in the league. And even if he's not a starter, bringing that off your bench could swing a playoff game. Yeah. There's arguments for each of them. So I think splitting up your investment in 3 ways like that is the right move.
Yeah. I think, thinking about Kobe Jones is like the classic, like if scouts in the 70s or 80s saw him, they'd be like, oh, the kid's a thinker, cerebral, I think is how they talk about Kobe Jones. Like he's the classic, like this guy knows what he's doing on the court at all times and just makes winning plays. Is I think how a lot of people would characterize him, which I think has a ton of value in the NBA, considering he also has like good size on him too. And I think you mentioned the shooting; it's getting better. I mean, he's shooting it better this year than he has previously, so that's good for him. But overall, I think there are some high end skills that Hawkins has that I think he deserves that extra dollar over the other guys. I think
kid plays the game the right way.
Oh,
coach's son mentality.
There it is.
Shout out to everybody watching live on YouTube. Shout out to the 2-Pointers podcast in the comments. Says of Hawkins, best movement shooter in this class. Love this kid. And that is a good way to get into the scout. And what other way, on this show than to get into the shooting? And for a guy like Hawkins, Albert, you absolutely have to start there. Right. That's where the juice is. So talk to me about Jordan Hawkins as a shooter, because as somebody who was very early on him and thought he was draftable last year, when his percentages were, not what they were this year, what did you see in his shooting last year that led you to believe he was going to have, the kind of shooting season he's having?
To explain how I've always felt about Jordan Hawkins as a shooter, I'm going to tap into the teachings and philosophy of Professor Corey Tulaba. For me, with Hawkins, I've always believed in the shot and the form more than the numbers. And that was the case last year, too. I just, from what I saw on the floor, and now we have to remember last year he was a freshman. He wasn't getting the same type of looks or minutes or action or usage or any of that. He was a guy who was coming off the bench, who was playing sparingly, but when he did play, you could feel the energy, right? But the thing with me and Hawkins is I always thought he had a really silky smooth looking jumper. I really enjoyed how the shot looked. I enjoyed the confidence that he had. I enjoyed the fact that he had no problem getting it off with a hand in his face. Obviously, as we're seeing from the comments, and you've already mentioned to Corey, the off movement stuff I thought was there last year as well. Obviously, he wasn't hitting it as much or whatever, but just watching him, it was like, oh, this guy he's one of these guys that were just like born to be a shooter, right? The form is very much like more of like the old school type, right? Doesn't really have that push shot, but he's kind of putting his whole body into it. And I really enjoyed it last year, and he's just hit it more this year. And so for me, it's like, I'm really happy for him that the percentages have gone up. And obviously the volume is there and all that stuff. But for me, I enjoyed it a lot last year. And all I could think to myself was, well, clearly he was going to go back to school. And my thing was, well, hopefully in his second year, he'll just get a lot more opportunity. And with more opportunity, he'll probably hit them more because the guy has the ability, but also he has the confidence. And that's something that I saw from day one. He was totally unafraid to get his shot up and get it off with all types of people draped all over him. He did not care. So I think that's a good place to start for me, Corey. I think the biggest thing was, I believed in the form last year, and I especially believed in the mentality that he had as a shooter.
Yeah, I in my notes I wrote maybe the prettiest jumper in the class. It's just beautiful, and you mentioned it's like more of the old school type, than that one motion push. Look, a lot of guys shoot the ball really well with that one motion push shot. To me, it's just not anywhere close to as aesthetically pleasing as when guys have a more traditional jumper. And I think one of the things when we talk about his movement shooting, I think it's really hard to be an effective movement shooter when you have that one motion shot. Mm-hmm. There are guys like Steph who can do it, but Steph, his release point, while consistent always, it's versatile in how he releases it, and there's consistency in his versatility. But when you watch him, Jordan Hawkins, fly off these screens, like he could shoot it either direction, and his release it's just so pretty. I agree with the 2 Pointers podcast that he's probably the best movement shooter in the class. This is a guy who puts the volume in volume shooting. I think at one point early in the year, he was getting up 17 3-point attempts per 100 possessions, which is astronomical. He's currently at 15. And what I love about it, and the volume, right? So he's at 15 3-point attempts per 100. Last year, he was at 12.2. He is at 7.4 real life 3-point attempts in his 27.8 minutes. Last year, he was at 3 in 15 minutes per game, right? Yep. Last year, he shot 33%. The volume went up.
Yep.
By a good amount.
Mm-hmm.
And he's shooting it at a higher clip.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, it's the opposite.
Correct.
So I absolutely love that. But when we talk about his movement shooting, there is an art to it. It's not just like running to a spot and turning and shoot. Like the way that he uses stop and starts, changes speeds, sharp directional cuts. It's just so much fun to watch. Mm-hmm. So he might not be like, and when you think of Jordan Hawkins, you don't think of him as a shot creator necessarily. And in the traditional sense, he's not, right? He's not a guy who is going to dance with the ball a ton. Mm-hmm. But he is creating all of these attempts for himself by the fact that he moves off the ball like a fucking G.
Poetry.
I love watching that shit, man. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like I there's something to that.
Yeah.
And how valuable that is and what it does to a defense. Mm. It discombobulates them. You got guys, him running from one side of the floor to the other. Now guys are they got to, if they don't have their head on a swivel, you lose them for a split second. Now guys have to, switch out if you're late. He's got a jumper up. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to watch. I love guys who are in that vein, and when they do it the right way, man, these guys, you can have a really long NBA career.
Yeah. Corey, I can't agree with you anymore. To be honest, I'm not saying that they're the same player, but like the madness that he brings to the floor and the gravity that he brings with what you mentioned, right? The off-ball movement stuff. I sometimes I felt like I was watching JJ Redick. I was like, oh my goodness, like what's going on here?
For those who can't see, I literally have the sports reference page up right now of one JJ Redick.
Oh wow! Look at us on the same page. But I mean, Corey, I think it's fair, man. The way that he moves and the way that the defense. And Corey, I loved what you said about the stop and start stuff, because watching Jordan Hawkins and him manipulating speeds was really interesting, because when we think of stop and start and we think about like the manipulation of speeds, we think of like quick to like really slow to fast or whatever. But I realized with Jordan Hawkins, it's a little different. It's either really fast or less fast. And I think that's like how he's manipulating speeds, because the guy, he runs like he got shot out of a cannon. Like he really runs his ass off. And even when he's manipulating speeds and doing like in and out dribbles and whatever, like all of that stuff is still fast. It's just less fast. You get what I'm saying? Like like James Harden, the type of guy who's like moderately quick, and then he'll come to like complete stops, right? Really quick stops and whatever. But Hawkins is a little different in that like he's going super speed and then just going really fast and then back to super speed. But
so I'm not using this guy in our if you bought stock in segment later, but he reminds me at times in the way he's running around when Zach LaVine is used off ball.
Okay.
Like Zach LaVine is, and it's honestly been a point of emphasis lately in the Bulls fandom, in how like he just doesn't shoot enough threes, and that's changed a little bit more recently, and how like if he's going to be used off the ball, like use him as a movement shooter, use him to be flying around screens because he could shoot it off balance, similarly to how Hawkins is doing it in college, and and like because it, for all the reasons, it creates that chaos. But Zach LaVine is also like a super freak athlete. Now, Jordan Hawkins is not athletically as gifted as Zach LaVine was, and even is at this point. Zach LaVine also isn't the athlete he was as a younger player. He's got a couple. He's older. He weighs a little bit more than he did when he was like this scrawny kid. Yeah. Crazy how these guys put on mass as they get older. He's had a couple of knee surgeries, so he's still bouncier than Hawkins. But like, I think the speed is a good comp for them, because I think Zach LaVine, even when he's going slow, a lot of times he's still going faster than other people, and it's like this weird cadence that is abnormal. Yeah. So sometimes you're like, I wish Zach had a better pace, but also it's like it's this weird cadence that's obviously really effective, and there's a little bit of that in Hawkins.
Yeah, I as you are our resident Giants fan, I was expecting some, I don't know, like Daniel Jones, like when he runs
Danny Dimes
really fast and then less Oh god,
I'm waiting.
Congrats to you, bro.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It's it's been a while since that boat picture surfaced online. And I'm waiting for this Danny Dimes run where he leads the Giants to a Super Bowl, and the clowns in our group chat try to discount that accomplishment as he hoists the Super Bowl MVP trophy up in the air.
It's insane. I know we're talking Jordan Hawkins. I apologize, everyone, but it's insane that next week when we're recording our next pod, your Giants might actually be in the NFC title game. Like, it's pretty
Look, I'm one step at a time. This year has obviously been tremendous. And I mean, it's a big week. Big week. We're talking Jordan Hawkins here.
Jordan Hawkins.
Now,
so fast.
So he's shooting 40%, near 40% on, this incredible volume of threes. It's a beautiful jumper.
Yeah.
How do you feel it differs when he's run off the line a little bit and he's kind of caught in the in-between area?
I think that's one of the holes in his game, man. It's something that I wrote down in my notes. Love him as a 3-point shooter. He's got some juice to him, driving all the way to the basket. The in-between stuff is where I think he needs to grow, Corey, is my opinion. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I was looking at his Bartorvik, right? I want to pronounce that correctly. Bartorvik, right?
I call it Bart because I don't know.
There it is. Okay, Bart Simpson numbers, and and the mid-range is where his numbers don't look as pretty. The in-between stuff isn't as pretty. So I would say, and Corey, I'm really excited to hear you talk about this in greater detail than I, but it seems like something he's got to add, in my opinion, because Corey, if we're talking about ultimate outcomes, 1% outcomes, blah, 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 it's the area of every scorer's game where it kind of elevates you from good or to really good or really good to elite, having that mid-range, from 20 feet, 18 feet, being able to score from that area really diversifies you as an offensive player. So I would say that is one area of his game that I really do think needs improvement.
Yeah, like, So I think he can be an effective mid-range shooter. He's got the jumper, right? He's still going to be doing it like coming off screens. It's not like you're telling him like, here's the ball at the top of the key, like let's run a pick and roll, and you're going to create a jumper out of it, right? Like he's still doing all the stuff where he's running around the court, flying off handoffs and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes you're going to, want to kind of attack it, right? That's part of how you leverage being that great shooter, is also using it to get yourself opportunities at the rim. A guy last year, Hyunjung Lee, was like, he was so good at like that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily like this mid-range game, but like using it leverage to mix up how he scored. And Hawkins, I think that's where he needs to improve on a little bit. And when I think when he gets into the mid-range, because it still looks like it still looks pretty, like he's a aesthetically pleasing shooter, but I think it's the processing of like he doesn't know when or if he's going to take those shots. And in that, the separation that like he creates as a 3-point shooter when he knows he's going to let it fly, versus like him maybe taking a couple of dribbles, seeing a big step up, and then he's going to like shoot that shot. Maybe it's off balance, or maybe he feels a guy kind of recovering a little bit because he took that split second extra to think about it. And now it's more of a contested shot. I think it's an issue in like just not making a definitive decision more than it is a capability issue.
Corey, I think you put that really well. And I think for me, the question that I have for you as the resident coach here, so in my brain, right, as you were talking about this, in my brain, I was like, okay, so what is the solution to that, right? So really quickly, looking at his BART numbers, I pulled it up. So on all other twos, other than at the rim, he's shooting 20.6%, right? 7 for 34, 14.3% assisted, right? Which is a really low number. So Corey, my question to you is this, right? If it's a matter of him having some awkwardness in that space and not really knowing when to be or how to be decisive about putting up, what are things that you could technically do, skill-wise, to help that? Like, do you build rhythm with like pound dribbles or step backs, or what's the solution for Hawkins to improve in that area?
So I think like from a in-season coaching perspective, it's like it's hard because it's a micro thing that you kind of have to focus on the individual level. And like when you're a team that it ultimately wants to win a national championship, like focusing on something like that at this point of the year is like something you're not looking. It's very difficult to work on. I'm not saying that, you have a big coaching staff, you have guys that are obviously going to break down film with him and maybe show him this stuff. And I think that is a very big aspect of it. Actually just showing like, when you see this scenario, like you got to just make a quicker decision. Like if you're going to shoot it, shoot it. If you're going to move off the ball and pass and relocate. Now with those numbers, right? So it's 21%. How many attempts was it?
34
in 17 games. So we're looking at about two a game, right?
Yeah.
It's not like super high volume. If he has a game where he knocks down a couple, all of a sudden that number is probably going to spike up. So I don't think it's a 21% level. I also don't think, it's like he's DeMar DeRozan in the mid-range or anything either.
Yeah.
So I think if I was like, let's say the season ends and we're going into this draft process, if this was a point of emphasis for him with his team, whoever his training guys are, I think you just put him in scenarios with, like he's coming off a pin down. He's going to kind of curl it as a passer. One of the coaches hits him off the curl and you teach him like you get to this spot. Now it might be like 1-2 dribble sidestep. If you're going right, maybe it is that like 1-2 dribble step back to create that space going left, but just definitively knowing like this is the spot I'm going to get to on the floor. And then you have another coach who is kind of a big man who's, maybe stepping up a little bit. So, all right, I don't have that full driving lane. He's going to step up. That's why I need to make that step back. Or if he's a little bit too lower, maybe I can take an extra dribble and, get to a little, mid-range pull up, or maybe I work on a little floater. So I think you watch the film, you look at some of the scenarios in which he struggled or overthought it, and you try to simulate to the best of your ability live ball exercises to build repetition and pattern recognition, so that when you do get into those game settings, you've been through it a bunch of times, and now you can just you don't have to think. You just know, in the scenario, I get to my spot.
Right. So, I mean, okay. So ultimately, Corey, what you're trying to say, I think the point that you're making here is that it really is a skills type of thing, right? And something that he needs to spend a lot of hours working on in the gym during the off season or during the pre-draft process, because in the middle of the season, I think it's going to be hard for him to find both the time and, as you mentioned, right, like the availability in terms of like coaching staff or whatever for him to do that. So I think I that's all good, man. Which actually, Corey, can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Of course.
That it correlates to all that. As a pick and roll operator, right? From what I watch, I actually didn't see him do a lot of it at all, but I was wondering his outlook moving forward, right? 'Cause if we consider the shooting gravity that he's going to have, the handle that he has, the change of pace that he's got, all that stuff, how do you view him as a pick and roll operator? Because part of that pick and roll operation stuff is like also like if you've got some mid-range stuff, it helps. It really does help to have that in your bag. So overall, kind of connected to what we were just talking about, how do you feel about him as a pick and roll guy?
I wouldn't worry about that aspect of his game.
Nice.
I think if, I think it's JJ Redick who kind of always says, like, a lot of guys in the offseason want to work at stuff to make their game as versatile as possible, but he learned to just maximize what he's great at. And when I think of Jordan Hawkins, I don't really need him running a ton of ball screens, because I think as a self-creator, right, like he's got a good handle. Yeah, it's not like great. He's not
right.
Jamal Crawford or anything with the ball, but he's also not going to necessarily dribble it off his foot, but he's also not using it. Like, he can get a look off for himself, right? creating anything for his teammate. When I think of him in ball screen scenarios, I'm not thinking of him in, let me get him the ball at the top of the key to get a screener, and then he's coming off and surveying and either using it to get like into that mid-range or pulling or hitting the roller. I'm thinking more of what kind of ball screen scenarios does he get into as a mover who is, like you said, moving around the floor like a Duncan Robinson, like a JJ Redick. And if you're paired, and in the NBA, like, you're looking at a ton of bigs who are playmaking hubs, who you're running your offense through, who you're able to come off a DHO. If he can fire off a DHO and use that after running, a lap around the half court, now firing off the DHO with a Sabonis, a Bam, a Jokic, or whoever, and now he's got a little downhill momentum.
Yeah.
Is he going to be capable of A, in a line drive, getting to the hoop? And B, is he capable of recognizing when the big man or the help sells out on him as a shooter? And can he make that little pass
right
to the big in that short roll area or as he rolls to the rim?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's perfect. That's perfect, Corey. I think ultimately the reason why I asked that question was because I kind of like low-key also was wondering how you viewed him in terms of like his outlook, right? And I think you answered that right there. Like I don't think we're looking at Jordan Hawkins to be a high usage, ball dominant type of guy who we're throwing the ball to and asking to create off of ball screens all day long, right? Like that's just not what we're looking for him to do. And so I appreciate that answer.
Yeah, and to the question I asked of, is he capable of making those passes?
Yeah.
Right? Is he capable of getting to the rim? I think the answer is yes. It will be to what kind of consistency can he do it? Because I've seen him make some really nice passes coming off that kind of stuff. And, I've seen him miss guys. I've seen him make sloppy passes. I mean, he's not a high turnover guy. right? Because he's not doing a lot of that creating. But he's also not a high assist guy because he's more of a play finisher than he is a play creator.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I think he's where he needs to be developmentally. And I think in these actions, he's going to be able to make those kind of plays. Now, you mentioned that like that in-between area, he's at that 21%, not very good. He's at almost 60% at the rim, 59%.
Yeah.
But I do, which is fine.
Fine.
It's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad, but it's not great.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have some concerns.
Same.
Do you have any? You do.
Yeah. Yeah. It really, like Corey, I'm sure you have a lot, so I'm just going to go with the two that I had. So first off, he doesn't have a left hand. He's like me. I played just the same way. If you were to ever play basketball with me, Corey, you would just play me to my left hand because I just don't have one, and it's just a real problem for me, and it is a problem for Jordan Hawkins. He will drive really fast and go left sometimes, and just absolutely have to go back to his right hand and throw up an awkward floater or awkward
I have a verbatim in my notes.
Okay.
Verbatim.
Okay, then let me stop.
Weak driving with his left hand, settles for off balance fall away floaters.
Yeah.
Except in my notes I wrote, and it's trash. Just straight trash.
I wrote it's junk. So
yeah, it's fucking garbage when he does that.
So bad.
Now, part of that also I feel like, which is the other thing I have written down, is like he is still a little frail.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, like, I mean, he's not like the skinniest guy you've ever seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he's also he needs to get a little stronger. Yeah. And when you're going to your offhand, you see he doesn't have that confidence to be like, all right, I'm going to dip my shoulder into this dude's chest, move him off the spot, and then, use either of my hands to get something at the rim. It's all awkward going away.
Yeah. 1,000,000,000%. And another thing that I wrote, Corey, because I just could not get over like how many times he was doing that. But also, like, I love his speed. I absolutely do. But I also wonder if sometimes, and obviously, Corey, this is a question directed to you. I love the speed, but sometimes I wonder if he's going too fast. Is kind of how I felt at times. But like overall though, like when he gets to his strong hand and he gets to do what he wants to do, like, yeah, like he has some really pretty finishes, he'll
yam on you.
Yeah. So that's one thing. Yeah. But then Corey, like going back to your other point, like he is a little light. Like I don't even want to say he's frail, because if you look at him, he doesn't really look frail per se, but
Agreed.
He is light. Like it's easy for people to like move him off of his spot, and he rarely, if ever, is finishing through contact. It's more of like the contact will move him off the angle that he was going for. And also there are a lot of times like he'll go up and either get stripped or blocked or whatever because he's just not like strong enough yet.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that, Corey, as you alluded to before in passing, it's like, well, if you've got that type of speed and the right mentality that I think he does have, adding strength is just a time issue and not like whether it's going to happen or not. Like it happens for everybody. So I'm not freaking out about that. It's just he definitely needs to get stronger for that to be just straight up better.
Yeah, 100%. And that's just NBA team. Let's get you on a diet. Let's get you on a program, and let's be patient with you and your body. Because I mean, look, obviously college has some big, strong dudes, and as college has gotten older more recently, right? Like those dudes are stronger, but they're still not the guys in the NBA. Now, maybe that speed and the extra spacing on an NBA floor will help a little bit, but also when you say like sometimes he's going too fast, I think that's something that is common in players as they develop, especially guys who like are not super comfortable creators with the ball in their hands. And again, like I don't think he's dribbled the ball off your foot like bad at handling, but he's obviously like having that pace of a guy like Devin Booker, right? Where it's like, or Brandon Miller. Just stirring the pot. like you don't always need to go fast to get to your spots. When you think it fast, you can go slow.
There it is.
Said plenty of times on here.
Mm-hmm.
But when going back to like kind of like the processing in that mid-range area where sometimes he's hesitant, if you're not thinking about what's going to be there when you get to a spot, because you could be really fast, but if the scout says that like you're just going to try to be really fast to the spot, guys will already be there because they'll meet you there a little bit earlier. So I think that's part of it. And it's just like, again, like watch film and maybe do some pacing stuff, like for as good as I think he does, like the stop start and the change of pace, like without the ball, like some of that with the ball a little bit, right? Instead, but again, like if you're for him, he's trying to attack in a straight line thinking I'm going to use my speed because maybe I'm not strong enough to where if I do meet somebody, I can kind of use my body to move them in the way that maybe some of these other guys can. So I there's a lot going on there with strength and just, he didn't play a lot last year.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's also still like learning and, I know it's shocking, but a lot of these guys aren't perfect players and, development is not just like
linear.
Yeah. And it could take him a while to figure it out, but the question is, can he figure that out?
Yeah. Corey, really quickly before we end this part of Jordan Hawkins, I just want to say, when the strength comes and the confidence comes and he works on the different things that we talked about, he's going to be I actually think he's going to be a really scary driver just because not only is he fast, but he could be pretty violent too. Like you mentioned, like he's willing to go chest to chest with guys at times, and try to dunk it on their heads. Like there are a couple, like in that Rutgers, not the Rutgers, the St. John's game. There was one where like he just,
and he drew a foul. He didn't finish it, but it was
it's like that's some alpha shit. So if he can get the strength up, I think he'll actually be a good driver.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, 60% at the rim, not bad. This is not a crazy weakness. It's just something like the left hand is, the strength is, and if he can improve on that while sticking with like, him being solid in a straight line, going to a strong hand, there's something to work with there and look to develop. I mean, I think we covered everything with his offense, unless you have anything else in particular you want to talk about with him.
No, just really quickly, last thing, I didn't really get to mention it much, but like you mentioned, Corey, I think the passing is just fine. There are a couple of moments where he'll throw some like really pretty like no look stuff, and you're like, oh, that's fantastic. But overall, like it's not a huge part of his game or his eval, to be totally honest. So yeah, it goes back to the point that you made earlier. We're just not really looking for him to be the primary creator for any team.
No, it's all right. With a guy like him, and if I'm an NBA team, I'm asking like, can this guy play 0.5 basketball? Can this guy keep the ball moving? Does he know when to move off of it if he doesn't have anything? That's what I want. And ultimately, I want him to be a play finisher. That's it. When he gets the ball, I want him to do the thing that he is great at, and that is shoot the three ball. I want him to be a guy who provides real gravity. So yeah, if all of a sudden this guy, learns to handle the ball a little bit and pass it a little bit, right? Like, great. That's Desmond Bane.
Yeah.
That's Desmond Bane without muscles, but he doesn't have that to his game right now. So what is he going to be great at realistically? And I think, focusing on that and just, all right, do you have the IQ to be a guy who can fit in within a scheme elsewhere? I think he has that.
Bingo. Agreed.
All right, let's talk about the defense. We talked about him being, how did you refer to him? Not frail, but
light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's listed at 6'5". I think he looks like he's got pretty good length.
Mm-hmm.
Listed at 195, but he's light.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, there's a lot to like. Maybe some stuff to dislike.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about him as a defender.
I actually, Man, my eval of him on the defense was like a little more lukewarm. I think so. Let me start with the bad, actually, because I think there, as you mentioned, Corey, there are things to really like about him as a defender. The one thing I didn't love, and now this is something that I think you can easily fix, is I just felt like when he was on ball, he was getting caught flat-footed kind of a lot. And I just felt like he was pretty easy to get by. It could just be me, but I felt like I don't. Maybe it's like a mental thing where I felt like maybe in his head he felt like he could rely on his jumping ability to kind of just let guys get by a little bit and then catch up for like a block or a contest in the air. But I felt like just from what I saw, I thought he was a little flat-footed on the ball. Was the negative part that I wanted to mention. So I'm not saying that I think he's a bad defender. It's just I just thought he would get caught a little flat-footed on the ball a lot, which I didn't love. But at the same time, I could be wrong, but I feel like that's something you could fix too. So I'm not freaking out about that. And then I'll wait to hear what you say, and then we'll talk about the good stuff. But yeah.
Okay, that's interesting, and I think there are definitely times where he kind of gets beat a little bit, and his man gets a step on him. I think for me, one of the things that I thought, like, I think he gives really good effort. Like, he gets low in a stance. He's lengthy. So guys will, maybe they'll beat him time to time. That's common at the point of attack. But ultimately, I kind of thought I was encouraged by it. I think one of the things him kind of, because I don't think they're like these egregious blow-bys that lead to layups.
Okay.
Like, I do think he's within proximity of his man. And a lot of times I almost thought, because UConn's bigs are so like massive, that he's leading them into the help. Okay. Because I'm pretty encouraged by his on-ball stuff. And even though he is, kind of like he's a shooting guard size typically, I think he moves well enough and he's long enough that he's going to be able to guard either spot. And I think that's important. As obviously the NBA has leveled up in size. And I think it's going to, like, for him, he might not be playing next to a traditional point guard. Maybe he's playing next to a bigger guy who is playing point guard offensively, but maybe can't stick with, smaller guards defensively. And I feel like he's going to be capable of guarding the one or the two. Now, what I will say is that defensively, like, going back to the strength, there are times where even if he does, maybe beat a guy to the spot, a guy could dip the shoulder and move him off of it. And that has led to, some easier shots at the rim, just because physically he's not strong enough to just take it in the chest and body up and like hold his ground as much as maybe, you would like him to. A guy like, I don't know, like Keontae George, who maybe is like similar in stature as far as like height and length or whatever, but like it's got that big chest to kind of just take it. And like, so that was probably my primary concern. Just like, Devin Booker will just back this dude down and have his way on him, regardless of like how hard and obviously Devin Booker is a very good basketball player, is my high level analysis there. And he is, the kind of guy that's going to do that to a lot of people. But just saying, like, a guard like that, he's going to be taken advantage of physically, I think, which is why ultimately I think it's important that he be able to maybe guard point guards.
Yeah. Corey, I think it's a really good rebuttal. I think for me, I just wasn't thinking in those terms. So you saying what you said about him kind of leading them to the bigs, I think is a really solid point. And I don't know. I think for me, I just wasn't thinking in those terms. So it looked a lot worse than maybe it should have looked to me. So I think that's totally fair. To his credit, though, I did want to say I thought he has really quick hands. And what you mentioned in terms of the effort and the desire, it's clearly there. I thought not only does he have quick hands, but I thought he showed not like Jalen Clark level, but some pretty decent anticipation in the passing lanes as well, where he was getting some nice steals and trying to run down the court and do something with it. And of course, like, there are the hustle plays in his tape where you go, that's really nice. right? Like
Yeah.
where he's like running down, and even like his help defense. There are times where, you know, he's not 6'9", 6'10", but he's down there as a low man and he's trying to, you know, contest a
He's
shot
good
at the
positionally.
rim.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's pretty
Yeah, I
good.
think he's solid.
Yeah, I think he's pretty good positionally, and also like he tries and he's not scared to go up and at times try to protect the rim. And is it always successful? No, but I like the fact that he has, as the kids say nowadays, right? He's got that dog in him sometimes.
He does have that dog.
Yeah.
I mean, look, you know, we talk about him being light. He does a half a block a game is pretty good for a guard.
Yeah.
It's pretty good for a guard. You know, that's a decent amount of blocks. I also think that he does a good job navigating screens.
Okay.
Talk about his defense.
Yeah.
I think he's got good timing, knowing when to step up and over, and it's like, because it's that awkward, weird cadence and that weird speed that he plays at. Like he kind of brings it in the same way.
Yeah.
So I think there's a good base there. And I mean, again, you know, this is a guy whose draft stock is right on the cusp between the first and the second rounds.
Yeah.
So it's like, obviously, this is the kind of player who is going to have some of these questions of like, where does he fit on an NBA floor on both sides of the ball? So, you know, this conversation is like trying to talk out where does he fit on an NBA floor in an NBA context, not just what is he doing in college. It's like, okay, if he's having physical concerns here in college, what's going to happen in the NBA? Is that fixable over time? Yes. All right, great. Well, is he giving effort? Does he try? Does he care on that end? He does. Okay, good. All right, maybe there's something to work with. Maybe it's not this year. Maybe he spends time in the G League getting, you know, better physically and getting reps there. Let's see how that goes. So, like, you know, there are paths where you don't need an immediate return, but you know, I think because he's got a dynamic skill on the other end, it's a question you could talk yourself into, because I think ultimately I would say he's a good defender, and effort, and the effort that I think that he gives on that end, that's ultimately the first thing that you can ask for on that side of the ball, because there are some guys who aren't good and they just don't really try a ton. So, right. Like, so the fact that he's giving the effort and he has some of these plus skills, he's got pretty good stock numbers. I think that he could survive. Right. And that's what you need from a guy with his stature. Like, can you survive with him on the floor? Because ultimately, if you look at like the offensive numbers, he could really help your offense down the line.
Yeah. And Corey, sometimes, and this is myself included, but I think sometimes when we're evaluating these prospects, I think sometimes we get so caught up in wanting all of them to be really complete players that we can be too harsh in terms of certain aspects of their game. Like I think what you mentioned before, right? The proper lens in which we evaluate Jordan Hawkins is really important. I think we have to not look at him through the lens of a holistically perfect and complete player, but we have to look at him as, this is a guy who has really a really strong, clear set of skills. Can he develop the other aspects of his game is a very good question, but it's not a question that should deteriorate or affect his draft stock in a way where he's like plummeting down boards just because he's not great at the other aspects of his game. I think we do that sometimes, where we
Definitely.
Yeah, we keep players at such a high standard and we want them to be good at everything, and we don't really cherish or give them the respect that they deserve for being really damn good at a couple of things. Where, you know, sometimes you got players who are like okay at everything and then they get overrated, but we tend to misrate or underrate players who have really strong skills at a couple of things and just aren't as great at the other things. So
that's why I think like including Colby Jones in that segment earlier is like a good example of this, because like obviously like Colby Jones's strength is in his versatility. Colby Jones doesn't have necessarily like some super standout skill. So is there value in that? Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Like he could help you in a lot of areas, but like that doesn't mean that is necessarily more valuable than somebody who has this superhero skill potentially that could really soup up your offense. And maybe you're only, you know, it's one of those things where you're only getting it for 20 to 25 minutes versus potentially a guy who maybe you're getting for closer to 28 and to 30. But in those 20 to 25 minutes, are you really hitting the gas and making some stuff happen? Like, that these are the type of things like there's not necessarily a right answer. It's what does your team need ultimately in that spot. And mentioning like the hyper focus on versatility and this and that, it's like also why I see a path still for a guy like Derek Lively.
Okay.
Because it's like I've seen like some of the dialogue, like you can't give him the ball in the post, and it's like, did we ever want that?
Who wants that anymore?
Did anyone want that coming into the year? Is that why he was the number one recruit? Is that why he was projected to be a lottery pick? Because it wasn't for me. I didn't. If I didn't see one post up, I would I don't need to see one post up from him almost ever. Right? It's like, can the NBA do a better job of putting him in position to play to his strengths? If I'm seeing from Derek Lively in the offseason these dumbass workout videos of him, working on crossovers into jumpers, and like his team is trying to make him look like Kevin Garnett, I'm gonna be like, this is cool for social media, but there's not one NBA team that's gonna give a shit about this. Like, how about a workout video that makes him look like Tyson Chandler? Playing defense in versatile schemes, drop, meeting at the level, catching lobs, running dead sprints down the floor, and dunking the ball off like hit-ahead passes, like shit like that. Like if he could perfect using his athleticism on both sides of the floor and keeping it simple, like there's a path for a guy like that. And similarly, like Jordan Hawkins. If Jordan Hawkins wants to be the type of player who all of a sudden is a guy who's creating a shit ton off the bounce and is trying to make Trae Young, Luka Doncic type passes, right? Then like I'm gonna tell our podcast audio team to delete this episode because I want him to be Jordan Hawkins. I don't want him to be some player that he's not meant to be. And sometimes for guys, and this is something, I coaching at the high school level, coaching at any level, not every player knows their game and what their strengths are. Some players want to, and sometimes those players work so hard and exceed the expectation, and they get to that point. Jimmy Butler, nobody thought was capable of being Jimmy Butler except for Jimmy Butler.
Right.
That is an outlier. Right? That is not the norm. The norm is like, can you stick to what makes you good, and can you make good great? Yeah.
No, I think it's something that I've been thinking about a lot as well, and I know it's tough, Corey. And Corey, you know what I was thinking about really quickly? I know we're going pretty long this episode, but I was thinking, in your mind, who's the ultimate guy who was kind of marketed as like a jack of all trades, master of none, who like really didn't work out? Because like for me, I don't know, I might be wrong in this evaluation, but I thought like Denzel Valentine was kind of that guy.
That's a great example. Denzel Valentine.
Yeah.
Shout out to Denzel if you're listening to this. I'm sorry for what I'm about to say. Truly bottom 3 to 5 least favorite Chicago Bulls players of all time.
Yeah.
Like, this was a guy who not only did he like misrepresent this like versatile college package, and maybe if he was actually like 6'8" or 6'9", he could have been that player, but he also was the guy who didn't know his strengths and what kind of player that he was, and tried to overstep what he was instead of, perfecting what he could do well. And that led to like, a highlight, an egregious, shot at the end of clocks that are going to live on forever. And ultimately, he shot himself out of the league.
Yeah.
He's not an NBA player. He's not an NBA level player. The versatile package wasn't good enough, and he tried to do too much. Like, that's a pretty bad combination, because he was a good shooter. He was a good shooter, and he was a slick passer. Like, he should have been
exactly,
could have been a guy who like hung around and contributed to teams. Like he could have played 0.5 basketball. He could have been a ball mover, a spot up shooter, even a movement shooter a little bit. Like and a guy who, maybe could have defended a couple of spots. He didn't always want to do that. And, he's a good example of that. What if Denzel was 6'8"? What if? All right. If you're buying stock in Jordan Hawkins, who may you have bought stock in previously?
I actually hated my answers this week. Usually I'm really proud and I'm really excited to share. But this week it was a little difficult for me. I don't know why. So I'll just go ahead and give them to you. I thought of first off, I thought of Malik Monk, the way that he's being utilized right now with the Kings.
Crossed my mind.
Yeah, I enjoy that. This is a really weird one, Corey. Don't hate me for it, but I even thought a little bit of Rudy Fernandez when he came in. I know it's kind of strange.
Interesting.
But Rudy was one of these really athletic guys who theoretically was supposed to be a sniper from the outside, a guy that Portland at the time was really, hoping to rely on as a guy to add spacing and athleticism to that team. It's just, it never really put it all together. And then I thought of
except against Team USA.
Except against Team USA, that is correct. And then I also thought of if this guy could shoot, maybe a Shannon Brown was the guy who came to mind.
I know body wise, right? A little bit, and movement pattern wise.
Exactly. The athleticism that Shannon Brown had.
He was next level.
Yeah, I know. But just I don't know if Shannon Brown
I see it.
Shoot,
I see
kind of where my head went. It was the three guys that I came up with.
Yeah, I liked Shannon Brown. I liked Shannon Brown.
Okay.
Not on my list of least favorite Bulls. We talked. You mentioned JJ Redick. I actually think that's a fun guy to think about, who did maximize his ability. And if you look at some of his college years, he had years where he wasn't super strong field goal percentage wise, but he was shooting such a high volume of threes that ultimately still efficient. A guy who probably dealt with similar size and strength issues early in his career, and kind of ultimately perfected and figured out what he was great at and how to utilize that, and had obviously a 15-year career, and is one of the absolute best media dudes out now. But I thought of Tim Hardaway Jr. is a guy, and then Malik Beasley, guys who are just really good movement shooters, maybe not guys that you're gonna count on to be your day in, day out starter, but can really get hot and win you a game, provide valuable floor spacing, and they're just easy fits to kind of put anywhere in an offense, right? I think that, if the Jazz try to move off of Beasley, they could probably get something, pretty valuable for him. And I think if you look back at guys like that, can Jordan Hawkins kind of have that kind of career? I think he can. And if he can, that probably makes him worth a top 20 pick. Right. So, those are the conversations, the guys I thought of, and trying to, get this segment done. Shout out to the chat. Shout out to Canal Bon Loya, who says salute and asked us about Baba Miller. And honestly, man, I got to see more of Baba.
Yeah.
It's still early. He's a little raw. Do I see him expanding his game? Only time will tell. But obviously, he's got a ton of raw potential. Could be a guy that shoots up, or could be a guy that, people saw as a guy with good physical tools and a versatile game, but wasn't really great at anything, and is maybe a little overrated. I'm not saying that he is. I'm just saying there are different outcomes for him. All right, Albert, it is time to close the show with America's favorite segment. It's time for you to sell me this pen on UConn sniper Jordan Hawkins.
Okay. First off, hello, America. It's great to be back. But okay, let me sell you on Jordan Hawkins. So the way that I like to think about it, my wife really loves doing puzzles. She recently finished a Spider-Man Venom Kith collab with Marvel puzzle,
Dope.
which is really cool, and I absolutely love it. And we're about to frame it. But the thing about puzzles are like you have all these different pieces that come together and create this beautiful piece of art or picture or whatever. Jordan Hawkins is a really important piece of whatever puzzle that you might be building for an NBA team, right? He's not a guy who you bring in to be the whole puzzle by himself, but he is a guy who's going to be a really important piece of the puzzle. Because the thing about building out a beautiful piece of art or a beautiful picture is that you need all the pieces to come together to fit perfectly for you to then have that beautiful piece of art. And if you're an NBA team, you need all different types of guys. And Jordan Hawkins is the type of guy that you're going to need on your team. He's a guy who's going to be an electric scorer. He's got one of the prettiest jump shots in his class. He's a really good athlete. He's a growing, budding, developing defender. And he has in his bag things that he's really good at, and he's going to be able to bring these things to the table to fit in with other guys and raise the floor and ceiling of your team by just fitting in so perfectly and making that beautiful piece of art. So that's how I view Jordan Hawkins. He's a guy that you need to finish that puzzle, but also is a guy who has a really high ceiling to him that we may not actually know how he ends up, but he's a guy that you're going to want to end up having on your team because of the things that he's absolutely good at right now.
That sounds like a dope puzzle. I need a picture of that when it's framed. And Jordan Hawkins could be a really fun piece to the puzzle. Could be a really good value guy that you get, depending where he lands in the draft. So,
Boom.
All right, Albert. If you are listening to this on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed, that means it is potentially a Thursday as this drops, or maybe you're listening to it a little late, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, little weekend action. Maybe you're saving it for a road trip. But that means that Albert has just released a piece on Jet Howard. Tell the people about what you're working on and where they could find you and all that.
You can find me at Alberto Gim on Twitter. On Instagram, you can also find me at GTGNBA. Is where you can find me there. Sorry about the different handles. That's just how I roll. What else? Yeah, as Corey mentioned, the Jet Howard piece is probably out by now if you're listening to this on Thursday or Friday. I wrote about Jet Howard, and he's a guy that I believe is one of the 5 best players in his class. And I understand that there are going to be people who don't agree with me and people who may even see that as a hot take, but he's one of these guys that I think has a ceiling and an outcome that might make him one of potentially like a star-ish type of player is how I really view him and how I'm really excited about him. So make sure you go check that out. And before I go, Corey, I just want to say you threw in Malik Beasley in there in your comps, and I have tweets on Malik Beasley from back of the day because I've been such a huge fan of his game forever, just because there's something about him aesthetically that I've always enjoyed watching, the way that he shoots the ball and the way that he dribbles. I don't know, all of it just looks really pretty to me. And there are currently rumors of the Knicks being interested in one Malik Beasley, and that would excite the hell out of me, is how I feel and how I want to end this week.
Really excited to read the Jet piece. Should we cover him next week?
Why not? Let's do it.
Let's do Jet Howard next week. I love Jet. I thought he was a guy I couldn't for the life of me fathom why he was ranked so low coming into this pre-draft process. His IMG tape, he was a guy that popped. He looked massive. He still looks massive. A lot of things to like about his game. So I'm excited for next week's episode. I'm excited to read your piece tomorrow, which is Thursday, or today, as you're listening to this. If you're listening to it on Thursday. You can find me at Corey Tulaba on Twitter, NBA Draft Dude, on I think Instagram and TikTok. And I just wrote a piece on Keontae George and his NBA bag, a little prospect chemistry piece. And I broke down film on all the different kind of guards that not only he compares to stylistically, but the kind of actions that they run in the NBA that make them successful and that he is capable of running. And I do like little side-by-side screen grabs of these players to show you the movement patterns and the kind of sets that they run and how he's capable of that. Some statistical queries from Bart bartsimpson.com. And so I really enjoyed writing that piece. Keontae is one of my favorite players in the class. So that is out now at NoCeilingsNBA.com, which you can subscribe to for free to get fire content delivered to that inbox Monday through Friday. I guess Sunday through Friday, every single week. And make sure that you like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You subscribe, rate, share, review, all that good stuff. The podcast, that kind of stuff really helps us out. And thank you for rocking with us. Everybody in the YouTube chat, everybody who is downloading these podcast episodes weekly and listening every single day. We love you all. Until next time, we out. Peace.
Peace.